Okay, welcome back to our lesson in American literature, week 4. And as you can see in the background, we've got our meandering stone wall, and I've got my Yankee Dum jacket on for this crisp fall day. So, uh, first, let's start off with our first poem. We didn't get to last week, but we'll make a go of it this week. Is the Old Oaken Bucket by Samuel Woodworth. And he was born in 1782 and passed away in 1842. So he writes this poem in 1817, and it became a popular song about 17 years later in 1834. So Samuel wrote poems and novels and plays and operas, and he was a newspaper reporter. But he was born right here in this little small town to a farming family, bunch of kids, and his prospects for the future were very limited. Basically, if you were born into a farming family, you became a farmer as well. And as we look at farms and farming in Yankeedom and across the country, not much had really changed since the Revolutionary War. Life was pretty much the same as it was back in 1776. So we have a whole 100 years of not much going on, and not much change. Now, Woodworth, again, grew up as a kid on a farm, and the local minister kind of took him in and took him beyond the usual uh, one room, schoolroom education of the day and taught him about writing and introduced him to poetry. And eventually, that minister gathered up enough money for him and sent him off to college. Uh, Along the way, he learns the printing trade. He becomes a printer. And he goes down to New York City, where all the big jobs are for printing. And he um, has a hard day at work. Him and his mates go down to the local pub after a hot day, and they are going to have a couple glasses of wine. So he orders a cognac, which is a very special, high price wine. And he drinks it down and he says, "Oh, there's nothing better than a nice glass of cognac." And his workmate says, "Yeah, there is. There is something better." He says, "I remember when I worked on the farm after a hard, hot day in the summer, coming back up to the well, getting a nice, cool glass of sparkling water. And nothing tasted better than that on earth." And Woodworth thinks about that for a while, and he goes back to his home, and he writes this poem in about a half an hour. And this poem becomes a standard that's even taught in American schools today. It becomes a song. There are a couple of YouTube videos on the song. It's a little hot on the ears from the music of that day, but if you want to take a listen, go ahead. Okay, so let's talk about the. Also, there is a trophy that's given has been given every year since 1925. It's called the Old Oaken Bucket Trophy, and it has something to do with the Big Ten Conference of college football, a special game between Purdue University and Indiana University, and whoever wins the game gets the Old Oaken Bucket trophy. So a couple of the, again, so this is he is would be classified as a romantic writer. And romantic writers look back at the past and make it seem like this is the best time in history. So, a couple of the quick vocabulary from the poem you might not know. It talks about where the cataract fell. And a cataract is a waterfall. He also talks about nigh, which is an Old English term that means near. And he talks about Jupiter. And Jupiter was a Roman god of thunder and lightning and storms and light and the sky. So again, this romanticized view of the past. Okay, so um, he was, so he grew up in this small town. He's a farmer kid, and like I said before, and it looks back at an idealized view of the small family-owned farm in the early 1800s. So what I'm going to tell you now is what life was really like in 1800 on a farm. Okay, so first of all, there's no bathroom in the house. There's a house outside the house called an outhouse, and that's where you go do your duty. But at night, you might do it in a pot or a bucket. And every day, you're going to take it out and get rid of it. There's no grocery store. There's no Aldi. There's no Spar. There's no little neighborhood Coop. Okay. There's one grocery store possibly nearby. And you can buy flour, coffee, and sugar. And that's about it. And you buy it on credit and you pay for it after the fall harvest. You dig your own well. You do your own blacksmithing, which is metal work. Put shoes on the horses. You do all of that. And you starve in the winter if you have a bad growing season. You would be expected to have 18 to 20 children during your marriage. Half of them will pass away by the age of 5 due to childhood diseases that we have vaccines and cures for today. You slaughter your own animals for meat. Chickens, pigs, cows, you do all of that yourself. Big day off, Sunday. Okay, everybody gets Sunday off, but you go to church and you're going to be there all day. Okay, church is an all day affair back then. Let's talk about hygiene. Okay, basically, it doesn't exist. There's usually a pan with water in it as you come in the house, and you wash your fingertips, maybe wash your face in the morning. And Saturday night bath is one bathtub filled with water, shared by everyone. Good luck with that. Okay, so clothes. Okay, so you have two sets of clothes. You have your Sunday best clothes, and then you have one set of clothes just for everyday farming. And those clothes are repaired and re-repaired and repaired and repaired until they fall off you, and then they make you a new set of clothes. Uh, let's see. Before the Civil War, there were no left and right shoes. They were the same for both feet. And it was your feet that stretched out the shoe to make it a right shoe or a left shoe. Good luck with that one. Alcohol abuse was rampant, worse than today. You do go to school. It's a one-room schoolhouse. Uh, the teacher teaches all grades in one classroom. And your teacher is usually a single woman, and she could be as young as 14 or 15 years old. Uh, School windows. Let's talk about school windows for a little bit. So, in these one room schoolhouses, one wall is designated as all glass. And that is so because uh, there's no artificial lighting. You have to rely on the sun and natural lighting. So the sun shines in. If there's one wall that's all glass, everybody gets the same amount of light. That's why desks are in rows. And if you think about it, even modern schools today have the same design. I mean, there's no need for that, but that's how it started from an agricultural one room schoolroom point of view, and not much has changed since then. Uh, in Massachusetts, some of the bigger cities are starting to really take hold of the American Industrial Revolution. And it was mostly textiles and shoes. And these factories were Springfield, Massachusetts, which is about 100 miles west of Boston, became a big center for industry and factories, and a lot of people went there for jobs. It was a very dangerous place to work, no safety standards whatsoever. But Springfield had a great run for about 150 years or so. And if you go today, it's a dilapidated city with lots of crime and high unemployment. And they never really progressed any further than that American Industrial Revolution. They never really bounced back from not surviving from the downfall of that. The average lifespan was about 35 years old. If you made it past age 5, you might live to be 60 or 70. So the idealized romantic view of American farming Yankeedom in the 1800s was anything but romantic. Okay, so that's a little bit about our first poem, Old Oaken Bucket, by Samuel Woodworth. So next we're going to move on to Robert Frost. He's much more contemporary in his writing. He was actually born in California, in San Francisco, but he moves to Massachusetts as a teenager. And New England becomes a central theme for most all of his writings. He passes away in 1963 in Boston. So the first poem is called Meandering Wall. You can see the stone wall in the background. And it's a poem about two neighbors that meet in the spring to repair their mutual stone wall. And Frost kind of questions the purpose of the wall. What do we need a wall for? Are borders necessary? Are humans naturally driven toward greater connection and cooperation, or does mistrust instinct always hold us back? This is the main question about Meandering Wall. So the speaker and his neighbors meet in the spring to repair the stone wall between their properties. They review the damage that weather and hunters have caused. And the speaker begins with a reflection. He says, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall. that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. So this is kind of a unique geological situation in New England. What happens in the winter, the ground freezes, and then when the warmer spring weather comes, it causes that ground to lift up. And what happens is the wall is kind of shaky. It's not cemented together. These are just hand placed. They begin to tumble down. And every year and every spring, you have to go out and repair your wall. So there's lots of contradiction in this poem. He says that boundaries that separate neighbors, and yet there are openings in the wall where neighbors can join together. So along these walls, okay, it's walling something in or out, and there'll be an opening, usually with a gate, a wooden gate, so that people can pass by and meet each other. So it's kind of a contradiction. Here we are, we're keeping things out, and yet we have this open doorway where we can cooperate and meet each other together. Um, the men are separate in their own property, and yet they work cooperatively together. So this is mine, this is yours. We don't meet each other, but if we have to, we will cooperate with each other. So Frost asks the question, am I walling something out, or am I walling myself in? You have to think about it. It depends on your perspective. Um, the neighbor doesn't say much. He has one line in the poem, which he says twice. He says, good fences make good neighbors. So generally that phrase means that you establish boundaries between you and your neighbor, and that helps both you know how to act and respect each other's space and privacy. Now, a general American characteristic is space and privacy, as opposed to other cultures. American space is generally about 3 feet between each other. When you stand in line, you generally have an arm's length between you and the person ahead of you in line. So I go over to Japan, and I'm maintaining my Yankee personal space of 3 feet. I'm at the post office waiting my turn to mail a letter. And all of a sudden, three people come in. They see me with my 3 feet. They jump in front of me. They think, hey, he's not in line. He's just standing there. So personal space between cultures can be very different. And privacy is a huge, huge, huge tenet of American culture. So as an example, I have a friend. I want to visit my friend. I don't just drive over and show up and knock on the door. I call first. Hey, are you okay to have me come by? Are you free this afternoon? Because in a polite American way, you don't want to disturb them. Now, again, when I'm living over in Asia, people would just drop by at any time, night or day, for no apparent reason, and knock on your door, and that's just the way things were over there. If you live in a small rural community, you might find that to be true as well. Okay, so Frost is getting older in his age, and President Kennedy is inaugurated in 1961, and Robert Frost reads a poem at that inauguration, and we're getting there. But in connection to the Meandering Wall, after the inauguration, Kennedy sends Robert Frost through the Department of State on a cultural mission to Russia to meet Nikita Khrushchev. Of course, there's always tension between America and Russia at that time. So, but it's interesting to note that even though during those tense times, both countries would send their artists, musicians, uh, educators, academics, exchanges of professors, all during this Cold War, so-called Cold War time, as a way to kind of patch things up or keep things cooled down a bit. And so Kennedy sends Frost over to Russia to meet with Khrushchev, and it's called the Frost-Khrushchev Summit. And he reads Meandering Wall, just kind of related to possibly the Berlin Wall in Germany, or how two neighbors can cooperate with each other, that kind of theme. Uh, he is not very successful. A few months later, we have a huge international crisis called the Cuban Missile Crisis. But nevertheless, Frost was sent to the Soviet Union to kind of keep things on an even keel. Okay, so the poem that Frost uh, reads at Kennedy's inauguration is called The Gift Outright. And he published that in 1942. And it really helped Frost to establish his reputation as a truly national poet. He becomes a national treasure at the end of his life. It's a very short poem. It's only about 16 lines. And it's kind of a brief history of the colonization in America by English and European settlers. It tells how these settlers made this land their own and their love of it and their devotion to it. But in the beginning, of course, the colonies were English, part of England. The land was there to be used to make money, basically, uh, to exploit. There was no real love or connection to the land per se. It wasn't really until after the Revolution that Americans kind of get this feeling of love of country. And he talks about that in the poem. So let's talk about the patriotic feelings during the Revolutionary War. Everybody thinks, oh yeah, hey, everybody's on board with this. We're going to get rid of England and we're going to start our own country. Not true. So John Adams, who eventually becomes president, at the time of the Revolution, he estimates that 33% of the colony supported independence. 33% supported England, and 33% had no feeling whatsoever. So here we have 66% of the population that either supports England or doesn't really care either way. And that 33% makes all the difference in the world. So in my ancestors were here at that time, and some of them fought in the Revolutionary War. And yet their brothers and cousins and uncles, and some of them left America and went to Canada, which was still under the crown. They were called loyalists. The grandfather that I'm connected to, his father had fought in the Indian Wars, which was kind of the real first World War in a way. It was France and England have been going at it for a long time, and they brought the war from the continental Europe to the United States. And they had big battles, and that grandfather died in that war. So back then, you're a soldier, you die in a war, your family isn't taken care of. Now the breadwinner's gone. Those young boys that grew up to be soldiers in the Revolutionary War, thinking back, it made their life doubly hard. They had to grow up, work the farm, take care of mom and dad, a whole bunch of kids. Okay. The general feeling was we know we're going to have to pay taxes. And that's what the war was all about, was about paying taxes. And they figured, what difference does it make who we pay the taxes to? England or these new guys that want to start a war with England? And the guys that want to start a war with England, they're not local family farmers. They've got plantations. They have huge financial investments and incentive to create their own country, not the general population. Okay, so that's a little bit about Revolutionary War. And Frost also talks a little bit in the poem about the westward expansion of America. So basically, the backdrop of that story is farming in Yankeedom was hard, real hard. Lots of stones, lots of rocks, lots of uncontrollable weather, very harsh winters. Uh, they made a go at farming. Um, it was difficult. They had an opportunity later in history, maybe 150 years later. They closed down the farm, abandoned them, and moved everything they owned out west where they could get more land, cheaper land, better farming land. So that was part of what the Western movement in America became later. And Frost talks about that in the poem as well. So eventually, in time, going from being British loyal subject citizens pre revolution to actually having a sense of national identity and pride. And that's basically what the poem is about. But Frost's most famous poem is called The Road Not Taken. And I'm going to try to read this. I hope I could do it some justice, but here we go. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that passing there, had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. This poem really talks about the human condition, and this happens to all of us. Have you ever had to make a decision, a major decision, a life major decision, like which college do I go to? Should I go here? Should I go there? Should I go to college? Should I learn a trade? Should I marry this girl or this guy or that girl or that guy? These are serious life choices that we all have to make. And that's what the poem is about. But what he says is he takes the road that most people wouldn't take. Okay, maybe just for the adventure of it. And he thinks, oh, I'll just try it for a while, and I can always go back and take the other road if I have to. But that's not the way life works. Once you get on a road and a path, things happen, and then other things happen, and then you're caught up in all those other things that happen. So once you make that life decision, you're on that road, you're on that path, and that's what he's talking about in his poem. And that's probably his most famous poem to date. Okay, so that's our poetry pieces. Uh, our next reading was by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's Dr. Heidegger's experiment. And he was born in the early 1800s, 1804, in a small, well, it's a town today, but it was a kind of a big deal back in 1804. It was called Salem, Massachusetts. And he dies just before the Civil War in New Hampshire in 1864. So again, kind of a romantic writer looking back at the past and all its glory. In the story, he talks about a myth that was passed through Europe from the early sailors and explorers that brought back stories about this new land uh, to the west of Europe. Okay, so his ancestor, he has an ancestor. His name is John Hawthorne, and he was a judge at what became the infamous Salem witch trials. Now, these are back in Puritan times. Some women were accused of witchcraft. His ancestor was one of the judges. They burnt a few of them at the stake for their supposed witchcraft. Time goes by. They said, oh, hey, that was not very Christian of us to do that. We made a mistake. Except Nathaniel Hawthorne's ancestor said, no, no, we did the right thing. It was fine. He never changed his mind about his guilty verdicts or what happened to those women during the Salem witch trials. So that might be an area of research for you if you want to dig a little deeper. Some pretty bizarre colonial history in the city of Salem, Massachusetts, the Salem witch trials. Okay, so his most famous story is called the Scarlet Letter. Again, this takes place back in Puritan Massachusetts Bay Colony from like 1642 to 1649. And it's a novel that tells the story of a main character. Her name is Hester Prynne. And she conceives a daughter through an affair, and then she struggles to create a new life for herself. So the story goes that her husband must have been a soldier, thought he's killed in battle, hasn't come back for many years. Everybody's given him up for dead. She has an affair, gets pregnant, gets arrested, goes to court, is convicted of adultery. So her sentence is to wear a big letter A on her clothes outside in public at all time as a shaming device. She's going to be shamed for the rest of her life for that affair. Now, suddenly the husband comes back, uh, wants revenge against the person that she had the affair with, but she never gives up that person. She never tells the court who her partner was. The husband's off on a revenge kick. He's going to find out who that person was and shame them, or worse. Come to find out, the person that she's had the affair with is actually the local reverend. And he, at the end of the story, he admits his crime, dies in her arms, a real tragic story. And that's Hawthorne's most famous story, called The Scarlet Letter. Movies have been made of it, made for TV shows have been made of it. It's very famous. Okay, so basically, it talks about the uh, uh, the story. Dr. Heidegger's experiment is written in 1837, and it kind of refers to what are called the seven cardinal sins. Not all seven, but a few of them. And the seven cardinal sins are pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, which means laziness. So it's an allegory, a story that shows philosophical and religious beliefs in the characters and events that have abstract meaning. So the setting we think is in Massachusetts somewhere, um, and it's in the study or the library of Dr. Hawthorne. It's kind of a creepy place. I mean, there's dust everywhere and cobwebs and dingy, dark. It's not a well-lit place. The story takes place at night, which makes it even more freaky. So, in the story, there are these characters. Dr. Heidegger, he's an older physician, very wise, and he is the protagonist of the story. The other characters, there's a colonel, Colonel Killigrew, and he's a man who, throughout his life as a soldier, had many indulgent sinful pleasures. Good wine, good food. Okay, he loves this sort of thing, and it affects his health in a very negative way when he's older. Our next character is Mr. Medbor. He is a rich merchant who loses all his money in speculation, uh, greed. Uh, Mr. Gascon is a politician, and his career is ruined by corruption. And then we have the widow Wycherley. She was an absolutely beautiful woman in her younger days. Loved all of those three gentlemen, Killigrew, Medbor, and Gascon. And then a character that is mentioned in the story is Sylvia Ward. And Sylvia was engaged to Dr. Heidegger. And the night before their wedding, she dies. She had been feeling ill. Dr. Heidegger prescribed some medication for her, and she dies the next day. So nobody's really sure if she dies of whatever disease she had or sickness, or was it the medication that Dr. Heidegger had given her. So he's got kind of a question mark in his past. Okay, so uh, the story proceeds that Dr. Heidegger goes into a book and he pulls out this old rose that was given to him by Sylvia on the night or the few days before their wedding, that he saved in a book. You put it in a book and you close the book and it dries out. So he opens the book, he pulls out this dried up old rose, and he sprinkles some of this water on it. He calls it magic water. And within a few minutes, the rose blooms back into its natural beauty that it was 50 years ago. So he invites the characters in the story to drink the water. And he says it comes from a place in Florida called the Fountain of Youth. Now, this is the old myth story that was passed through Europe hundreds of years before. An explorer, real guy, Ponce de Leon, goes down to what is now present-day Florida, to a lake called Lake Okeechobee. And the natives there tell him about this magic place that has healing water. If you drink it or you bathe in it, all your ills will go away and you become younger. So somehow Dr. Heidegger gets some of this water. And he shows them what happens to the rose. And he says, if you drink it, you'll become young again. So they all kind of like that idea. I mean, they're all old men and old ladies now, all wrinkled and kind of look like your instructor. And they drink the water and they become young. And they love it. And they want to drink more. So they drink more and they become younger and younger. And through all of the mistakes that they made in their past, you think that they would have learned their lesson. But no. Killigrew starts thinking about, get a bottle of wine, have some nice food. Melbourne starts making deals, some kind of real estate deals to make a bunch of money. Gascon's running around saying, vote for me, vote for me. He's going to be that politician again. And the widow Wycherley is chatting up all the guys and teasing them and wants them all to dance with her. And now a fight ensues, just like back in the old days. And the water in the vessel is on a table. It gets knocked over in the fight. The water is shattered and spills all over the floor. And they become old again. The effects of the magic has worn off. So Dr. Heidegger says, hey, you guys didn't learn your lessons from the past. You know, you should have learned something from your experiences. And instead, they're all plotting to find their way back to Florida to go find this magic water. Okay, so the moral of the story is learn life's lessons and don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Okay, so next we have a video. It's called the Downeaster Alexa, and it's a song by Billy Joel. Now, this kind of introduces the seafaring part of Yankeedom, which is very prevalent. We talked about the shipbuilding days and the triangle trade and fishing, and became a very rich natural resource, even pre-colonial times. There were Basque fishermen from Spain and Portugal fishing off the coast of maritime Canada and New England long before the Pilgrims got here. And in fact, there's a couple of interesting aside stories about that. One of them is a story about a First Nations young boy who is captured and made a slave, is taken back to Europe. He's made a slave over there as a young boy. He learns Spanish and English. He finally ends up under the care of the church, and they plot, they feel bad for him, and they plot a way for him to get back to his people. And this is actually a true story. And his name is Squanto. And he does make it back. He makes it back during the time of the Pilgrims, when the Pilgrims first got here. And he finds that his old village, there's nobody there. They had all been wiped out by a disease called smallpox that ran rampant throughout the Americas, killing lots of First Nations peoples during that time. So his village is abandoned, and it's called Patuxent, and that's where Plymouth Colony had established itself in that old First Nations village. So he sees that the English are there. He knows about them. He does speak English, and he walks into the village and he says, "Good morning, Englishmen," and they're astonished. How is this First Nations guy speaks English perfectly? He becomes a man without a country. The neighboring Indians don't trust him because he spent too much time in Europe. And he does end up settling and living with the colonial people in Plymouth for a few years, and then he dies. But along the way, he makes some peace treaties and so forth. So that's one story. Another aside story is that in 1200, long before Christopher Columbus goes to seeking a passageway to India, these First Nations fishermen, they're in a canoe, not the pretty little canoe you see on a lake, but a made for the ocean canoe, which is probably 25 feet long, 6 or 7 guys in it. They would go way out in the ocean for hunting, for fishing. They get caught in a storm. They're thrashed all about the Atlantic Ocean. And they end up crashing on a beach in southern France. And the French see them, some strange guys, feathers, red faces, dugout canoe. Where are these guys from? Don't speak any of the European languages. So they're taken in by the French, actually. And there's no way for them to get back. They're spending the rest of their life in Europe. So they travel about Europe as a curiosity, like a circus freak show kind of thing. And this is well before, this is 1200 sometimes, in the 1200s. So, 300 or 400 years before Christopher even thinks about going to America. So the fishing industry was well known off the coast of New England and maritime Canada. Very rich resource. Uh, they said that even during the Pilgrim time, we know what lobster is. It's kind of an expensive dish today in the local restaurant. But back then, you would just walk down to the beach and you'd look down and you'd pick them up out of the rocks. And it was the food of the poor. This is what the poor people ate because it was abundant, easy to get. You just reached into a pool of water, grabbed the lobster, and now you've got dinner. Well, okay, time goes by, overfishing, big, huge trawlers, not just Americans fishing, but other countries come into this rich, abundant natural resource and they strip it out. And now, today, the fishing industry is pretty much finished. There's really not much left of it today. Lots of rules, lots of regulations, really a difficult industry to become involved in. The cost you have to have a license to do it. The cost for your boat. And now in Billy Joel, he talks about the Downeaster as a kind of fishing boat built in Maine, used for lobster fishing today. Now, that boat can cost $150,000. And then you got to buy the traps and the gear and pay for your license. And so, I mean, the people that have dedicated their lives for this traditional fishing, well, they make money, but it's a hard job. And there's prices and competition between Canada and the United States, and they have different sizes. We have different sizes. There's battles between territories of who owns what and that sort of thing. So Billy Joel's song is about that struggle of being a fisherman today, and the struggles that a fisherman has to go through to make a go at it. And in fact, he talks about some of the famous fishing places that are off the coast of Yankeedom: Montauk, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, so forth. So these places play a big part in some of the literature that we're going to be talking about coming up. So the fishing industry has basically died as of today. People still do it, but it's certainly nothing like it was 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. And that's what Billy Joel's song is about. The name of the ship, Americans usually name their ship after a wife or a daughter, or always a female name. And Alexa is his boat. He really owns a boat that is a converted fishing boat for himself, and it's named after his daughter. Okay, so the next song is called Brandy, and it's a story about a young girl who is a barmaid in a coastal fishing village. And the fishermen and the sailors come in, and she serves them their whiskey and so forth. And she's a pretty girl, and she is engaged to marry someone who's out to sea. And she's waiting for him to come back. But he never comes back, and she never gets married because his first love is the ocean. And this is a theme that runs through stories of men and the sea and their connection to it. So that's the song of Brandy. Our next set of videos are just little snippets and snapshots of the movie Jaws, which becomes America's most famous movie, directed by Steven Spielberg. It's based on a book by a guy by the name of Benchley, who writes the story Jaws, Peter Benchley. He's still alive today. The movie is kind of a horror, scary movie about a rogue shark that kills a few people on a beach and swimming around the waters of Cape Cod. The movie is filmed off an island of Cape Cod called Martha's Vineyard. This was back in the 70s. Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket today are two islands off the coast of Massachusetts, both famous for their fishing history, mostly the whaling industry. So, excuse me. So here we have Jaws, and it's really a modern day version of the famous novel written 100 years before called Moby Dick. And Moby Dick is a story of a Captain Ahab who has this, he's possessed by this notion to go and kill this white whale that in an earlier time bit his leg off. So he's got one leg, and then he's got a prosthetic leg that he has to wear for the rest of his life. So he's possessed by this white whale. His real job is to go out and catch whales for whale oil, but his undertaking is really to go out and kill this whale that he wants his revenge against. In the story Jaws, we have Captain Quint, who has a Downeaster boat, just like Billy Joel's song. And he's a shark fisherman. And there's a backdrop to the story about that that is true, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And he's possessed too to go out and kill this great white, they're called great white sharks. So both captains possessed out after seeking revenge, one form of another. Both of them die in the end. Both of their ships get wrecked in the midst of the story. So there's lots of parallels between these two stories. So Jaws is kind of a modern day interpretation of that story, Moby Dick. Um, let's see here. So for next week, let's talk a little bit about what we've got coming up for next week. Is a story called A New England Nun. It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet story set back in that idealized farming time of the late 1800s. Another story is by a contemporary author, John Updike, and it's a story about a young teenage boy who works in the chain of supermarkets. They're called A&P, and these became the big supermarkets throughout America during the 60s and 70s. And it's a story about a boy who's a cashier, and he gets into a little argument with his boss about some of the customers. And then the third story is called The Comeback by Elizabeth Van Steenwyck. And it takes place in Yankeedom, modern times. And it's a story about good sportsmanship that we talked about earlier. Okay, so, I should probably get a few minutes here, so I should probably jump back and try to connect up again with the Jaws theme. So, you see the clips, the selection of clips that I gave you, and in one of the clips, Captain Quint talks about a true historical event that happens during World War II. And Quint is supposedly one of the crewmen aboard this ship called the Indianapolis. So how the story comes about is they're in Quint's boat. They've been looking for the shark all day. They've seen him, but they can't capture him. So they're having a couple of beers, having dinner, and one of the characters in the story notices on Quint's arm a tattoo. And he says, "What's that tattoo about?" And he shows him the tattoo, and it says Indianapolis. Now, the character that notices the tattoo, his name is Hooper. He's a scientist from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And he knows all about the history of the Indianapolis. And what that history is, again, true story, is a mission is sent to deliver the atom bomb that's going to bomb Japan to an island in the Pacific called Tinian. And it's a secret mission. and they have no radio communication. There's no chance of them being detected. And Quint is a crewman on that boat, and suddenly they do get detected. And on the return trip, they deliver the bomb, and then they're returning back to port in the West Coast. They get discovered by a Japanese, probably a submarine, and the boat is sunk in the middle of the Pacific, and they're left there to survive. And the waters, warm waters, filled with sharks, and they have to fight the sharks off. A lot of them die because of shark attack. Uh, Suddenly, a few days later, a young pilot is American pilot is flying very near to the area. He sees them in a big circle in the ocean. He radios another ship, a boat, a flying aircraft that can land in the water. And that aircraft comes in and rescues the men. And Quint talks about the time that he was most afraid in his whole life was waiting for his turn to be picked up by that aircraft and saved. He says, I'll never wear a life jacket again. Okay, so that's the true story that is in part to the story, the movie Jaws. Okay, so I'm going to have to uh, make a little connection to this video. Basically done with our outdoor shot, and we're going to go back inside for a while. Okay, so let's talk about our novel reading, An Abundance of Catherine's. I'm going to go through the first 5, 6 chapters as a quick summary. If you haven't started reading yet, probably should. We are. I will send you an email later about changing the date of the assignment. Maybe add a couple of extra options for you. Okay, so our story, An Abundance of Catherine's, the setting is Chicago, very modern, contemporary times. Of course, the story is absolute 100% total fiction, although it really captures the teenage lore of American youth uh, in contemporary times. So the novel begins the morning after noted child prodigy Colin Singleton has graduated from high school and has been dumped for the 19th time by a girl named Catherine. So he's had 19 girlfriends, uh, all named Catherine. Colin takes a bath and notices that he's too big for the bathtub. He feels like an adult pretending to be a kid. Well, I don't know. I'm not so sure. I think he's a kid pretending to be an adult. That's my opinion. Colin reflects on a book he read when he was 4 about Archimedes, who shouted Eureka and ran through the streets when he discovered the phenomena of water displacement. So, Eureka is a key vocabulary word that runs through the story. Whenever he comes up with a new idea that he hadn't thought of before. At the time, Colin asked his mother if he would ever have a eureka moment. She assured him he would. The narrator notes, but mothers lie. It's in the job description. So he's kind of a mother's boy in a way. He's not really independent and on his own, still seeking his mother's for emotional support. Okay, so Colin is too depressed to cry. He gets out of the bathtub and finds his parents sitting on the bed, waiting to talk to him. And this is never a good sign when your parents are waiting to talk to you. Okay, whatever the subject matter is, this is not. Although Colin feels he should be an adult because he's graduated from high school, his relationship with his parents remain one in which they confront him in his bedroom, in which he hopes for their comfort. Well, he doesn't quite get that. A little from his mother, but certainly not from his dad. So he's kind of, all broken up about his girlfriend dumping him, as he calls it. He's getting dumped uh, right on the same night as his graduation. Uh, and he hopes for their comfort. Uh, he finds out that the girlfriend did call, talked to the parents, and said, "Hey, I'm worried about him. He's acting kind of strange, weird. So just wanted to check in, make sure he's okay." Um, Colin feels like he's literally ready to blow up. Um, his father says, "Well, looks like you're not going to be hanging out with your girlfriend this summer. Maybe you should take a course at the local college." Dads are always very practical. Okay, so it's 10 p.m. and our next character enters Colin's bedroom, and his name is Hassan Habish, and he calls him a name in German, and it means you're kind of a wimp, kind of a weak kid, snap out of it, and forget your little depression. And Colin says he wants to die. He all he ever wanted was for her to love him. And the other thing that runs through his story is he wants to do something meaningful with his life. He feels alone again, and he feels like a failure. So Hassan has some choice nicknames for him. Hassan, parents are from Lebanon. He's practices the Islamic faith, uh, and he tries to kind of kidding around in a way, but he tries to convert Colin into believing in God, which Hassan does very deeply, although he doesn't always follow the rules. Um, he basically says, "Hey, there's only one solution for you, and that is you should take a road trip. And a road trip is you jump in your car, you don't have any real destination in mind. It's kind of an adventure. Take things as they will, as they come about." And this is actually an American youth cultural um, idea or concept that is practiced today, where kids will, especially after high school, maybe take a little road trip for themselves and kind of explore, get out of their little cloistered small town environment or their big city that they've probably never left or not traveled very far, and to do it on their own without parental supervision. So Colin has to kind of talk his parents into it. They're not really keen on the idea in the beginning, but he manages to talk them into letting him go. 5 minutes later, he's in his car. Again, a very typical American teen car. We would call it a beater. It's an older car, uh, maybe a hand-me-down from the parents before they, instead of trading it in and getting a better car, they give it to their teenage son or daughter, kind of get the feel and practice of driving. Uh, Parents generally do not buy their teenage kids a brand new car, especially today. $20,000 for a new car, kids learning how to drive, things happen, and they do. Better to give them the older car, cheaper insurance. If he cracks it up, no big loss. Okay, so they're in the car heading over to Hussein's parents, get permission to go on this road trip. Hussein's parents are not too keen on the idea either. Hussein is a year older than Colin. He graduated last year, but he didn't go to college. He took a year off. It's called a gap year. But he really didn't do anything special. He just kind of hung around the house and watched TV and wasted time. And his dad's a hardworking guy and wants his son to go get a job. Okay, if you're not going to go to college, go get a job. So they convince Hussein's parents that to go that it gets permission to go on the road trip, and they now Hussein uh, doesn't want to lie to his parents, but it's okay if Colin lies to his parents. Okay, so that's fine. So they say that Colin's going to help him find a job, and it'll be good. Hussein can help Colin get over his broken heart. So they both, they grab their gear, their clothes, throw it in the trunk, and they're headed off to their wild adventure. So um, they find themselves driving down the highway, and Colin is driving, which forces him to concentrate on driving, which takes his mind off his broken heart. So he also has kind of a physical, psychosomatic, physical pain in his stomach through his emotions of his broken heart. And this reminds him of an assassination that happened in history of the Arch Franz, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was assassinated and led to World War I. This is one of the crazy thoughts that passes through his mind as he's driving. So he kind of flashes back to when he was 2 years old, and his father's reading the newspaper. You know, sees Colin sees the print on the back page, and at 2 years old, he starts reading the headlines of the newspaper, and his parents are astonished. They say, "Well," and both his parents are educators. His dad is a university professor. His mother teaches French at a private school. So they notice and recognize right away that their son has some special academic promise. And they teach him how to read uh, in both English and in French. And they took him to a psychologist for an IQ test. And the psychologist says, yeah, he's a very special person. And while he's in the office, kind of waiting for the results of the testing, he notices a word and he makes what's called an anagram. And an anagram is a little puzzle, kind of a word puzzle. And he takes the word and he takes the letters in the word and he either creates another word using all the letters or maybe a simple phrase or something like that. So, as an example, let's say you took two words, a gentleman, and you wanted to make an anagram of that. An anagram of that would be elegant man. Or take the word funeral, taking the same letters, you could make a little phrase called real fun. And another example is if you took McDonald's restaurants, rearrange the letters, you can make a simple sentence. Uncle Sam's Standard Rot, which is kind of a play on junk food. So, um, Colin eventually he goes to a special. They're called gifted children. These are kids that are super smart that go to special schools, and he goes to that kind of pre-nursery school, kindergarten, and he's smarter than everybody else. But he's not toilet trained yet, so the school says no. Sorry, your kid's too smart. He's not toilet trained, so he can't attend school here. So eventually, he enrolls in first grade, where his mother teaches, and he was a year younger than most of the other kids. His parents push him hard to study. They kind of wanted him to have a normal childhood. Uh, really kind of developed his social life, which he fails at miserably through most of the story. Um, he was kind of a know it all, and he struggled to make friends. He was bullied. So he's really kind of an awkward boy. Um, but girls seem to be attracted to him for some reason. They like it that he's just super smart, but they don't stay with him very long because he's boring, basically, and socially inept, and he can't really tell a good story. It's hard to have a conversation with him. His mind runs in so many different directions, hard to keep up with. So, um, but in third grade, he wins over the heart of a pretty young girl named Catherine. This is Catherine number one. So, um, as he's driving, he's reflecting back on all of these kind of weird, bizarre threads of his past and things that he has studied. So they make it to Kentucky. It's about 3 a.m. in the morning. They pull into a rest stop off the side of the highway, and they're going to try to sleep. He tries to sleep. Hussein's already in the back seat, sleeping away. So he remembers how he met Hassan. Hassan came to Colin's school when Colin was in 10th grade. Hassan had spent most of his education in homeschooling, studying at home. So he had no real practical, he has social skills, a lot more than Colin, but maybe not as much as a usual student who would go through a public school system. So Colin makes a kind of a stupid remark in the class. And the whole class laughs at him, and Hassan takes him aside and says, "Hey, look, this is something you shouldn't do. Okay." Um, Hassan kind of babysits him in social situations and does talk to him kind of boy to boy and says, "Hey, you really messed up here. You shouldn't be saying things like that, or you could have said it this way." And Colin respects that. He respects the fact that actually Hassan is kind of well liked. Hassan's kind of short. He's a little fat. He's self-conscious about his looks. They're both kind of geeky in a way. Uh, Hassan is a smart boy. They take advanced classes together. And it's basically Colin's only friend. Okay, so they made it to Kentucky. Um, they get up, start driving again. They again, Colin still is running through this thread of his last Catherine girlfriend, Catherine 19, and it come to find out that they had planned to travel to Paris together, both Colin and Catherine 19, because Colin was on a TV show, a game show, a contest, and it was called Cranal Kids. And it was kind of a test show where they asked kids a bunch of academic questions. And Colin wins the contest, and he wins about $10,000. So he's got money. He doesn't have to worry about how he's going to pay for his trip. And now, because he's obviously not going to Paris with Catherine number 19. Uh, so they're driving down the road, and Hassan sees a sign, and the sign says, "Next exit to see the world's largest wooden crucifix." And Colin said they shouldn't bother because neither of them is Christian, and it will remind him of Catherine number 19. She used to wear a cross, and so he doesn't want to see a crucifix. So time goes by. They they want to find some air conditioning because it's getting hot, and Colin's old car uh, has air conditioning, but it doesn't work, and rolling the windows down doesn't really help. So they see another sign that says the gravesite of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, exit 212 in Tennessee. So Colin remembers back that just the night before he had kind of a thought about the Archduke, and they decide to go see the gravesite. Now, how the gravesite of the Archduke ends up in this little town in Tennessee is another story. And it's time to grab a bite to eat. So they find a little kind of off the road restaurant called Hardee's. Hardee's is kind of McDonald's like. It's hamburgers and greasy food and soda. And yeah, it's okay once in a while, but you don't want to make a steady habit of it. And so they stop there and they talk to the waitress who gives them directions to the gravesite. And it's in a little town called Gunshot, Tennessee, a real small town. It's got a population of less than 900 people. And the waitress tells them it's out in the sticks. And out in the sticks means you are surrounded by forest and trees and woods, and that's about it. So Hassan, who is Arab, uh, is kind of worried about going out into the sticks. He doesn't look like a normal, he doesn't look like a regular person from Tennessee. Obviously, he's a different cultural background. And he thinks they're going to die there. So he's a little worried about going out into the countryside and being a minority person. So they follow the directions of the waitress, and they come to a bright pink two-story building made out of concrete. And there's a sign outside that says, "The Kingdom of Gunshot, Eternal Resting Place of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Ice Cold Beer, Soda, and Bait." And bait means that's what you buy to go fishing. So they go into the store, and they notice there's a kind of a pretty young girl um, who is the clerk, and she's reading a magazine called Celebrity Living. And these are kind of junky magazines that talk about who's dating who and who got divorced and who got married, all the famous movie and TV celebrities. A junky magazine. And they start kind of talking with the girl. And Husan, it's kind of funny the way he introduces himself. Uh, Husan introduces himself as Husan Habish, Sunni Muslim, not a terrorist. And the girl's name is Lindsay Lee Wells. And she replies back, "Lindsay Lee Wells, Methodist, me neither." Okay, so kind of a funny little introduction between the two. And she is the tour guide to go to the gravesite of the Archduke. And it costs $11 each. So they pay the money, but she puts it in her pocket. She doesn't put it in the cash register. So kind of curious about that. So the three of them leave the store and they have to hike out into the woods to the cemetery where the Archduke is buried. So, of course, Colin's kind of a fuzzy-brained kid. He's thinking about everything except what he should be doing, and he slips and falls and hits his head on a rock and cuts his forehead open. So there's kind of a little injury and catastrophe on the field, so to speak. And uh, Lindsay is a medic in training. Um, she patches him up really quick. She runs back to the store, gets a first aid kit, comes running back, um, kind of patches him up a little better, and they continue on their way. They paid the money, so let's go see the gravesite. So, um, along the way, Colin has a notebook and a pencil. And I guess as he's waiting for Lindsay to come back with the first aid kit, he kind of sits up and he's working on a theorem to predict relationship outcomes. So, along with anagramming and being able to speak 11 different languages, Colin's other pursuit is making graphs and theories. He's got lots of theories. But he wants to predict relationship outcomes because he's been dumped so many times. So that in the future, he would be able to predict whether he's going to get dumped again. Okay, so he kind of flashes back to uh, Catherine, another Catherine. He calls Catherine number one. And because of his being bullied in school, he is only taking a few regular classes. And then the rest of the day, he goes down to the library where he has a tutor. And the tutor's name is Crazy Keith. Now, Crazy Keith is a friend of Colin's father at the university. And he really gets along well with Colin, and Colin learns a lot from him. And so he uh, meets Crazy Keith's daughter, who he calls Catherine number one, and he really gets his first kiss, and he's thinking about this. So throughout the whole story is this thread of Colin doing something and then thinking about one of the Catherines, doing something else, and that reminds him of Catherine, and he starts thinking about her. Okay, so um, they finally get up to the gravesite, and Lindsay has this whole tourist spiel that she usually gives, and she says, "Hey," she recognizes that Colin probably knows more about the Archduke than she does, so she skips the whole uh, tourist story. And he kind of talks a little bit about the Archduke. He talks a little bit about the history and about the family and what the family really thought of him and so forth. And they're kind of admiring the gravesite. And then next enters some characters. This is Lindsay's friends from school. They're coming up the hill to meet Lindsay. They've gone to the store. They see the store is closed. They know that she must be on a tour. So the two boys introduce themselves, not as who they are, but as some French tourists, kind of playing with the heads of Lindsay's friends as a joke. And so finally, they come clean and explain who they really are. And one of the boys is also named Colin, and this is Lindsay's boyfriend. He's kind of a big, husky farmer kid, tough, strong. Okay. And that's Lindsay's boyfriend. And he becomes TOC, a nickname Hassan and Colin give him, and that means the other Colin. The two other boys get nicknames as well. One is called Jeans Are Too Tight. His name is Chase. And Fulton becomes Short One Chewing Tobacco. And there's another girl, and she is Katrina. Not not a Catherine, but a Katrina. So Colin has no interest in a Katrina. That would ruin his record. Okay, so they go back to the store and they meet Lindsay's mother. And Lindsay's mother's name is Hollis, and she owns a business. It's a textile mill that makes a very weird product today. And she keeps many of the local people in the town employed. Um, she has done very well financially in the past, although the business is kind of running into trouble now. But that comes out later in the story. So Hollis recognizes Colin from the TV show Cradle Kids, and everyone's shocked because Colin thinks, "Hey, who would have watched that program anyway?" But somebody did, and somebody recognizes Colin for being on the show and winning the show. So he feels, kind of celebrity like. Hollis takes a liking to him right off the bat because he won the game show and he's probably one of the more famous people that have ever come to um, this little town, Gunshot, Tennessee. So she invites Colin and Hassan to dinner. And they go to the house, make a long story short. They go to the house, they have dinner. It's kind of a funny little scene getting to know the family and who's who, having dinner together. So they end up staying the night. It's a huge house, again, because Hollis did well financially. Very comfortable house. And Hollis invites them to spend the summer there and gives them jobs. And the job is to go around and meet the local residents of the small town and record their life stories for a project, possibly a book or some kind of memory thing for the historical society about the history of the town and the people who have lived there and some of the past stories. So the boys accept the job offer. It pays $500 a week apiece, free room and board. And the only thing that Colin wants is some time, in addition to working, to work on his theorems. And they say, yeah, sure, no problem. You'll have plenty of time to work on your theorems. Lindsay does speak a little German, so she and Colin starting to get to know each other a little bit. I mean, she already has a boyfriend, so friend and friend. Let's see, not girlfriend, but friend plus girl type of thing. Uh, he The house is pink, which is really kind of unusual. Um, they talk a lot about who they are and what they've done, and come to find out, Lindsay's good looking now, and she's a popular kid now, but she wasn't when she was younger. Well, at least she thought she wasn't. And they noticed some pictures of her when she was younger, and they asked, who is this? It doesn't look anything like you. And this was during her kind of makeover time when she wasn't so popular. And she goes and try to mix her whole fashion and persona over, uh, and basically it failed and made it even worse for her. And then suddenly she decides she wants to be popular, and she starts acting like a popular kid, and she becomes popular. Okay, so um, this is kind of where we kind of leave off our story. Everybody's kind of getting to know each other. They go out and they start their new job. Um, and they've kind of landed into a really kind of interesting spot for themselves. Okay, so if you haven't read any of the story yet, no worries. This is just a quick introduction to the first, probably 6 chapters or so. Um, no spoilers in it. That just gives you kind of a background to go on. Okay, so I think that's it for today. Until next week, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.